The topic I've chosen for this session, I'll probably speak for about 50 or 60 minutes, and then we'll open up the conversation as last time. The topic I've chosen is planetary health and urbanisation. So I'm going to walk you through in this talk. The first thing I would like to do is make sure that we're all on the same page with the idea of the Anthropocene, because I think it's important that we have that as a foundation as we head into this week. And then I'd like to spend some time telling you about the Rockefeller Foundation Lancet Commission on Planetary Health, the process and the key findings from that. And finally, I'd like to connect it to urbanisation, of course, the overarching theme of this workshop, China in the Urban Age. What I'd like to do to get us started is to show a short video. It's a 3-minute video that was shown at the opening ceremony for the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, the second of the Earth Summits. And this, in this 3-minute video, it tells the story of the Anthropocene. It was developed by colleagues based in Sweden at the International Biosphere Program. So let's watch this 3-minute video together.
This is the story of how one species changed a planet. The latest chapter of our story begins in England 250 years ago. Fueled by coal, then oil, several brilliant inventions appeared. They ignited the Industrial Revolution, which spread like wildfire through Europe, North America, Japan, then elsewhere. The great railways, then cars and highways, connected people across the globe. Medical discoveries saved millions of lives. New artificial fertilizers meant we could feed more people. Population rose rapidly. But this was nothing compared with what was to come. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. Globalization, marketing, tourism, and huge investments helped fuel enormous growth. People swarmed to cities, which became even more powerful engines of creativity. In a single lifetime, the well-being of millions has improved beyond measure. Health, wealth, security, longevity, never have so many had so much. Yet 1 billion are malnourished. In a single lifetime, we have grown into a phenomenal global force. We move more sediment and rock annually than all natural processes, such as erosion and rivers. We manage 3/4 of all land outside the ice sheets. Greenhouse gas levels this high have not been seen for over 1 million years. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer. We are losing biodiversity. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining, and other causes. Sea level is rising. Ocean acidification is a real threat. We are altering Earth's natural cycles. We have entered the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch dominated by humanity. This relentless pressure on our planet risks unprecedented destabilization. But our creativity, energy, and industry offer hope. We have shaped our past. We are shaping our present. We can shape our future. You and I are part of this story. We are the first generation to realize this new responsibility. As the population grows to 9 billion, we must find a safe operating space for humanity, for the sake of future generations. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
My microphone dropped down. Yeah, so you can see the credits going up there. I mean, I find, while it's somewhat simplistic in a way, representation of the big challenges we face, I think it is still a very useful part of a conversation to ensure that we've at least got a shared understanding of what geoscience is telling us. It doesn't really help us, I think, so much from the social science and humanities perspective, but it does provide a useful base from the natural science perspective. It's in that context that there was a meeting in China convened in 2013 by the Rockefeller Foundation, which was 100 years old in 2013. And the Rockefeller Foundation, a US-based foundation, importantly, I guess, oil money is behind the Rockefeller Foundation itself. But as a foundation, they haven't invested heavily in thinking about cities and city futures, and also thinking about human health and human health futures. And in 2013, the foundation convened a meeting to look ahead. If they were to be around for another 100 years, what might they focus on as a foundation in the human health space? And it was a small group of people assembled, and one of the people that was invited was Richard Horton, the editor of the Lancet, the world's leading medical journal. And at the meeting, Richard made a compelling argument for more focus on what we might call the ecological foundations of health. So when we tend to think about human health, most of the public discourse about human health in countries like Australia and China is actually dominated by a biomedical understanding of health. If you like, a Western scientific understanding of health. There has been some focus in recent decades on what we might call the social determinants of health, the social foundations of health, through the work of the World Health Organization and Michael Marmot in particular. But at the moment, internationally, we've seemingly forgotten that all human health, indeed human well-being, human survival on Earth, entirely depends on the health of natural systems, a stable climate, healthy ecosystems, the challenges of pollution, for example. And so Richard Horton laid out these challenges and the need for more focus on these ecological foundations of health in the day-to-day health discourse. And the Rockefeller Foundation subsequently agreed to fund a commission on this idea of planetary health. This is the Commission report, Safeguarding Human Health in the Anthropocene. And you can see here a list of the commissioners, and it includes Pang from Tsinghua, and I was also a commissioner at the time. I was directing the Global Health Institute at United Nations University, based in Kuala Lumpur. In essence, this 50-page report, which I think was made available as part of the pre-reading for this week, is a review of our current understandings of these relationships and a set of key policy recommendations. But importantly, it very much builds on previous work, and some examples at the bottom of the slide there. So the work of the Brundtland Commission and the report Our Common Future. And notable that Gro Brundtland was a medical doctor before she was Prime Minister of Norway and led that commission that reported in the 1980s. The IPCC, of course, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has a focus on human health in some of the work. The work of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, when Kofi Annan was leading the UN, and there was a specific component of that on relationships to human health and well-being. You may have heard of One Health, which is an approach to bring together understandings of human health with the health of animals, all other species, in the context of the environment, and eco-health, which is another initiative very much founded in understandings of ecosystems and their relevance to health. And the CBD there at the bottom currently has a new major program on human health and biodiversity, including a focus on microbiological diversity. Because as we continue to be greatly challenged by antimicrobial resistance in healthcare systems, but also more generally in veterinary health and beyond, then we need to be focusing as much on the good guys, all those microorganisms, those trillions of microorganisms that we need every day to be healthy, so that we're not having an exclusive focus on the pathogens. But the final person that is acknowledged on the slide is Tony McMichael, a very eminent environmental epidemiologist, trained here in Australia, but did a lot of his work overseas. And he was really the first academic in a contemporary context to sound the alarm about these challenges, these planetary health challenges. And this was one of his books. Now, 25 years ago, Planetary Overload, Global Environmental Change, and the Health of the Human Species. And Tony went on to lead the work of the IPCC on climate change and health. And his work was very much about this eco-social understandings of health to complement the biomedical. But of course, we can go further back. In one example, we can think about the work of Hippocrates in ancient Greece more than 2,000 years ago. And this was one of his books on airs, waters, and places. Hippocrates is really considered the father of medicine in the Western tradition. But he was writing about these relationships more than 2,000 years ago, before we had the benefit of new technologies in medicine. So Hippocrates was talking to his patients, he was thinking about the way they lived and the environments they lived in, and he was helping them, guiding them on the basis of that ecological understanding. And we need to reclaim that now, because this is almost receded into the background in health and medical thinking. Importantly, though, as Luigi pointed out right at the outset, by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the Australian Indigenous people, the custodians of this land, all Indigenous cultures around the world have a central tenet, a central focus in their spiritual traditions that is about the connections between people and nature. Waiora is the Maori word for well-being. My background is Maori and Scottish from the very southern parts of New Zealand, the Ngāi Tahu tribe. And this Maori word is a composite word, Wai meaning water and Ora meaning life. And I know we've got a number of the participants in this workshop are very interested in Indigenous perspectives, and we'll have, I think, a lively session on it later in the workshop. So what do we find in the Lancet Commission? Well, one thing we found was that by almost any measure, the human population is healthier than ever before. So here, if we look at this graphic of life expectancy, here on the left from 1960 through to 2010. This is World Bank data, and the black line in the middle of the graphic is the world average life expectancy. So you can see that through this 50-year period, we've seen a rise in global average life expectancy from the low 50s through the high 60s. Notably, of course, there is very significant inequities in life expectancy. So you can see here Africa, and here in purple, South Central and West Asia. But it is important to note that in all regions, health is improving. But to achieve these health gains, we've exploited the planet at an unprecedented rate. And these are some of the graphics about the great acceleration that we've already been discussing. So whether it's escalating carbon dioxide emissions, ocean acidification, global energy use, global deforestation, water use, fertiliser use, the list goes on. And our geoscience colleagues are now advancing the idea that there are boundaries to a safe operating space for humanity, the so-called planetary boundaries. And here, one of the graphics from these publications, and concern that we're already exceeding this, the planetary boundaries for genetic diversity and for biogeochemical flows, and obviously great concern from the point of view of climate change that we are close to potentially exceeding that boundary. But there's a list of 9 boundaries identified at this stage. And so you see there that the term planetary boundaries, we're talking about planetary health here, the whole idea of the planetary and planetary thinking as a counterpoint to global thinking, which was really very much has been the dominant discourse in recent decades. So what is planetary health? Put simply, planetary health is the health of human civilization and the state of the natural systems on which it depends. And we've already opened up a conversation about what we mean by civilization, of course. It's probably worth spending a little bit of time just sharing an understanding of the range of relationships between climate change and health, because we're not all public health people in the room. And this is a schema that illustrates the potential range of pathways between climate change and health. So climate change on the left of the graphic, health impacts on the right. And we've got 3 broad categories here. The direct impacts of extreme weather events, for example, these extreme weather events being amplified in frequency, intensity and duration by climate change. And it's pretty clear that heat waves, floods, fires, storms, water shortages have health impacts. When we start thinking about the second category, the indirect or system-mediated impacts, it starts to get more challenging and it becomes more complex. As Luigi was highlighting earlier. So we identify 3 subcategories of these indirect or system-mediated impacts. The changes to physical systems and processes. And one example would be urban air pollution. So in a city such as Beijing, on any given day, there is an amount of air pollution produced as a result of the human activities that are going on in Beijing on that day. Importantly though, the level of the air pollution and the risk to human health that results is also influenced by the weather conditions at the time. So in very hot weather, for example, we get higher levels of ozone formation at the ground level and a higher level of human health risk in that context. So that's an example of a change to a physical systems and process as a result of climate change that will have health consequences. The second category is biological changes, changes to process and timing. And here an example would be mosquito density, for example, changes in the abundance and distribution of mosquito vectors in the context of a changing climate with potential changing levels of risk from vector-borne disease, for example. And the third subcategory is changes to ecosystem structure and function, changes to fisheries, constraints on microbes, nutrient cycles, forest productivity, for example. The third category of pathways between climate change and health is the flow-on effects as a result of these direct and indirect changes. We get flow-on effects via social, economic and demographic disruption. And here, for example, we might identify drought conditions. Here in Eastern Australia at the moment, there's a very deep drought on the eastern part of Australia, and this is affecting the levels of soil moisture in our agricultural areas, which is leading to declines in agricultural yields and declines in the incomes of farmers and farming communities. And this is having flow-on impacts in terms of mental well-being of farmers, and we're concerned about suicide rates and depression rates among farmers and farming communities in this country, but not just in Australia, in India and elsewhere, in China, around the world. So that's an example of a flow-on effect that has human health implications. In that case, it's mental health implications. But there are a range of other demographic disruptions, including displacement in the context of, for example, rising sea levels in the small island countries in the Pacific. So I think that schema can be quite useful to help us keep in our minds the spectrum of the challenges that we face from climate change. But climate change isn't the only environmental change that we're seeing in the Anthropocene. And here's a schema from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that gives a view beyond climate change as well. So on the left here, escalations of human pressures on the global environment, the range of environmental changes and ecosystem impairments that we're seeing. Climate change, as I've discussed, with its direct ecosystem-mediated and indirect and flow-on effects that we've just talked through. But we could also do this for these other changes: forest clearance, for example, land degradation, biodiversity loss, urbanisation, which is, of course, the focus of our workshop. So what did we find in the Commission? Well, we found that multiple environmental changes are already affecting food availability and quality around the world. So from the climate change perspective, temperature and extreme events of climate, carbon dioxide fertilisation and its potential impacts on the nutrient profile of food, pest molds and fungi, land degradation as well, water scarcity, loss of pollinators, overfishing and ocean acidification. We need to be thinking integratively about these changes. And then air pollution. Certainly a big challenge in China, WHO declaring it an emergency, and around the world, more than 3 million deaths each year from ambient air pollution, more than 4 million premature deaths per annum from the household burning of solid fuels. And then a very specific example of land use change and landscape fire smoke. Average annual global mortality for this 10-year period from 1997 to 2006 around the world due to landscape fire smoke. So this is associated with the use of fire as a cheap way of clearing land, often for the oil palm plantations, and increasingly in Southeast Asia for the raising of beef, for example, in Indonesia. And you can see here on the map lighting up those regions, Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where each year there are thousands of unnecessary premature deaths as a result of that landscape fire smoke. This is a classic planetary health challenge, a political economy challenge as well, because the fires are often in one country and affect the health of people living in our countries. The big challenges of transboundary pollution that we face now. And then emerging infectious diseases, whether it's in this region in the Asia Pacific with H5N1 and SARS, or in the African region with Ebola, or Zika, more recently in the Americas. So in the context of land use change, deforestation, urbanisation, there are new opportunities for humans to encounter animals, and we're seeing the sharing of these novel infectious agents. But that's a pretty depressing story, and we realise that. And when you look at the Commission report, we were careful to make sure that the report had positive messages as well. So about half of our work was focusing on meeting the challenges. Much of what we need to do, of course, we already know. It's really about getting on and applying what we know. And in a human health context, there's actually a good news story to tell about climate change and health, and that's the idea of co-benefits for health. So health co-benefits from action on climate change. And in 2009, there was a series in the Lancet on this way of thinking about human health and human health futures and modelling different pathways for those futures. So when we're thinking about energy generation, for example, a rapid transition to renewable energy will importantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from energy generation, but also reduce the toxic emissions from energy generation and bring nearer term health improvements. And we're seeing this approach being used in some of the debates we're having in this country and elsewhere about the transition from coal-fired energy. Mobility, when we think about urban mobility, then transitions from sedentary ways of moving in cities, in motor cars, are now very prominent, of course, in North America, in Australia, elsewhere, but increasingly, of course, in China too, and a whole range of health challenges from those sedentary ways of living. Not just physical health challenges, but also mental health challenges, because if we're physically active in daily life, we're protected from depression and other mental health problems. So by transitioning to active transport in cities, getting people walking and cycling and using mass transit, then we realise these near-term health benefits as well as the benefits in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And similarly with food systems, transitioning to a plant-rich diet from a meat-rich diet. A country like Australia, very high proportion of dietary energy comes from animal products, and that has individual health consequences as well. Rates of what we call chronic diseases, including bowel cancer, for example. And so this transition to plant-rich diet in countries where vegetarian food is common, it probably seems quite unusual for people to have so much meat in their diet in this country. And it has, certainly we can see in Australian health statistics, these challenges that we face. But the transition will bring these near-term human health benefits as well as lower footprint on the earth. So this positive story is useful for us in thinking about futures. And I mentioned in some of the small group discussions that we had this morning that from my perspective, it's very important that we add to epidemiologic understanding of human health by bringing in an ecological understanding. And this is one example of this. It comes from Stephen Boyden, very eminent human ecologist. And this might seem like a very simple communication device, but it's actually quite a profound one and can be very useful. So he calls it a biosensitivity triangle, and it's about understanding that all human activities, everything that we do, whether we do it as individuals or whether we do it collectively, has the potential for positive or negative impacts on our own health and positive or negative impacts on the health of the planet, of natural systems, and there are feedbacks between these. So the idea of co-benefits is essentially about transitioning, transforming the way we live, the things we do, if you like, to optimise those things for our health and for the health of natural systems, thereby leaving the world a better place for future generations, of course. And so other things we found in the report were that there's much that we already know about developing sustainable and healthy cities. Active travel, as I've mentioned, reducing fine particulate air pollution, green spaces, opportunities to bring biodiversity into cities, reducing the urban heat island and also bringing direct mental health benefits, watershed conservation, access to healthy food, increased resilience to floods, storms and droughts. And then multiple approaches for meeting increased food requirements as we have a rising incomes, a rising middle class in Asia, in China in particular. Then we have rising demand for food. And so a range of agricultural approaches that we can deploy, sustainable intensification, more efficient use of water, reducing food waste, very important of course, and also again bringing this back to the individual. So always thinking both at the population level and thinking at the individual level. And the idea of an eat well plate that has a more plant-based focus, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And food waste, what we found is that nearly 30% of the world's total agricultural land is used to produce food that's never eaten. So in low-income countries, the food may spoil before it gets to the table. In higher income countries, it may be thrown out from the table at the end of the meal, for example. And then forest conservation, evidence from the Brazilian Amazon that forest conservation reduces disease risk. Another example of a co-benefit from an environmental intervention, whether it's malaria transmission, fewer vector breeding sites, larger vector predator populations, microclimates inhibiting anopheline mosquitoes, acute respiratory infections, forests filtering the fine air particles, fewer fires, and lower smoke emissions as a result, reducing the collection and the burning of biomass fuel, and diarrhea, the forests reducing flooding and filtering pathogens. And importantly also family planning. More than 200 million women around the world want to avoid pregnancy but don't have access to effective contraception. And access to that family planning could cut maternal deaths by around 30%. So again, another example of a co-benefit. But meeting the needs for modern contraception in low-income countries is not particularly expensive, but lots of political challenges in the current international context. And then the circular economy, I think already today there's been a mention of, is it the national sword policy in China, which we've seen that change. Now China declining to take Australia's waste, and this is helping to prompt new discussions in Australia about the transition to a circular economy. So I think interesting opportunities in that context as well. So transitioning from a focus on high consumption, wasteful approaches to a focus on reuse, repair, and recycling, and indeed perhaps not even talking about waste anymore, but understanding that all of these they're resources for us all. The byproduct of one process is potentially a resource for another. So the final conclusions of the Commission report were that solutions do lie within reach, but will require a redefinition of prosperity to focus on quality of life and improved health for all, together with respect to the integrity of natural systems. And we identified three broad groups of challenges. The first we might call conceptual challenges, or if you like, failures of imagination. And perhaps to illustrate this, maybe if I said to Luigi, if I give you $1, Luigi, how would you spend it today to maximise GDP in this area? Because in Australia, that's the way, sadly, we tend to measure progress, is gross domestic product. And I suspect it's similar as a headline measure in China as well. And so if Luigi was to spend that money, perhaps go to the local shop and buy an apple, then it might potentially improve his personal health. But if he wanted to really make a difference to GDP here in Darlington, in this part of Sydney, the best thing for Luigi to do would actually be to use the dollar to buy a box of matches and then burn down this building, this conference centre, and burn down indeed as many buildings in Darlington as he could before he got caught for arson. And the reason why that would be good for GDP is that within months these buildings would be rebuilt and there would be economic activity in Darlington and Sydney more generally as a result of that arson. And
good for my health, though.
yeah, that's right. Well, Luigi might be in jail, of course, but I think what that reminds us of is that GDP is not a good measure of progress. It's a measure of economic activity. And so if we are to genuinely measure progress, then we have to bring in measures of human well-being and the state of the environment. And that's, of course, a key part of the discussions that we're having. The second area where we made recommendations was around research and information challenges, and importantly, the need for what we might call transdisciplinary research. So we defined multidisciplinary research as groups coming together to do research from different academic disciplines and applying their discipline to the problem and reporting it collectively. Interdisciplinary are again academic disciplines, a variety of disciplines coming together, but they are interrogating the problem but trying to think about it from the perspectives of other disciplines. So there is actually a new kind of knowledge that emerges rather than just the classic knowledge of the disciplines. Transdisciplinary approaches, we argue, are where we transcend academic disciplines and value the know-how of policymakers, city managers, people who work in industry, and bring that together in a more transformational way. And there's certainly not enough of that, and that's what we're aspiring to in some of our work here at the University of Sydney. The final area that we identified challenges was the governance challenges, the failures of implementation. And I'm sure we're going to have quite a focus on these in this workshop. But one positive example that we pointed to is the work being done in Wales, in the United Kingdom, where they have a new act, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that was legislated in 2015. So the first time to have legislation for the future, where the government is required to think about the implications of the decisions they're making, not just for people currently alive, but for future generations. And that's where we need to get to. And it's a big challenge for Wales in implementing that, but we need to be learning from and with those sorts of initiatives. Just doing a bit of a time check here. I think, how am I going, Luigi? Is that...
I think
Still got a bit of time, yeah. Here's a link to the Commission report, and you can download a variety of materials there. Yes, that's right. I should have changed the guide, shouldn't I? If you click on it, you'll be able to, you'll get access to the slides. But yeah, and there's a variety of other materials there, not just that 50-page report. There's other video material and infographics that you may find useful. I want to say a few words as I round this out a bit, though, about how we connect this with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Of course, the big difference with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, beyond the Millennium Agenda, of course, with the MDGs, is it's an integrated approach to poverty eradication and sustainable development. And all member states have signed up for change in this context. And for high-income countries like Australia, I think that our country doesn't really know quite what it's signed up for, because the changes required to meet the SDGs in Australia will be quite profound. It's not just low-income countries and middle-income countries where we need to see change. And so that provides us with an opportunity. And from a public health point of view, we're arguing for this approach that we call contraction and convergence. So contraction in consumption and enabling further sustainable development in low and middle income countries and convergence of outcomes. And again, thinking about human health, clearly SDG 3 is the health SDG, but from a human health perspective, as well as thinking about keeping people well as an input to sustainable development, because we can't contribute to development as best we can unless we're as healthy as we can be. We also need to remember that health is an outcome of sustainable development, and that means that health is relevant to all 17 SDGs. And the World Health Organization uses this graphic to illustrate the SDGs to make that point. That when you're looking through the lens of human health, that all of the other 16 SDGs provide foundations for health and well-being. UNDP issued a brief on planetary health in 2015, arguing that this planetary health approach can be useful as an integrated way of implementing the SDGs to help us avoid going down 17 different silos of implementation, which is clearly a risk with the SDG process. And there's new research funding. The Wellcome Trust, the world's largest funder of health research, now has a new program, Planet Our Health, and they're making available funding for this transdisciplinary type of research. And there's a new conference series on planetary health being organised by the Planetary Health Alliance, which is hosted at Harvard University. The most recent meeting was in Edinburgh in May last year, and new journals publishing the sort of research that we need to be doing. So the Lancet has a new title, the Lancet Planetary Health, an open access monthly journal, and of course many of you would know that Nature has a new title, Nature Sustainability, and they're looking to publish the sort of work that we'll be talking about in this meeting. And indeed, Nature Sustainability was launched at Tsinghua at a workshop hosted by PUN last January, this time last year. And Future Earth, which many of you would know of, I think, an international research platform that's aiming to provide knowledge and support to accelerate the transformation to a sustainable world. So working closely with the SDG processes. It's a 10-year initiative launched at the Rio Plus 20 conference initially proposed in 2012 at Rio Plus 20, but formally launched in 2015. And the International GSD Advisory Program, which produced that video, is a core part of Future Earth. And within the program, there are now 9 knowledge action networks, which are bringing together researchers with people who will use the knowledge to collaborate and to co-produce the sort of knowledge we need. I think this very much acknowledges a point that came up in some of the small group discussions, I think, raised by Capon, about the fact that science and technology at the moment is really an important part of the problem we face, and that we need new kinds of approaches to have the knowledge that we need if we are genuinely to transform to a sustainable world. And then to come back to the work of Stephen Boyden, who I mentioned earlier, this is one of his books, The Human Ecologist, The Biology of Civilisation, and understanding that human culture is a force in nature. And in essence, that's what the Anthropocene is about, isn't it? It's understanding that collectively we are now a force in nature. We're changing our systems to such an extent that we'll see it in the fossil record, even if it's as simple as all of those chicken bones that we'll see as a result of the food we eat, for example. Stephen's work has encouraged us here at the University of Sydney to develop a conceptual framework for planetary health that we're beginning to use. And I realise it'll be a little bit hard for you to see this at the back, but I'll walk you through it. We find this helpful, and hopefully you will as well. And so at the essence of the way we're thinking about planetary health is that we need to start by understanding that human culture is central in the Anthropocene and is a central challenge for planetary health. And so by that, when we talk about cultural options, we talk about our worldview, what we know about, what we believe, what we prioritise, and acknowledge that there are options there. Like maybe they're bounded options, but there are variables at play there. And the culture that we have will shape the societal arrangements that we make. The economic system that we choose, is that a high consumption economy or a circular economy, for example, the government regulations that we'll put in place, and our education system, what we will learn about, both formally and informally. So there are cultural options at play that we need to understand and acknowledge. These cultural options will influence a range of biophysical options. Human population, I referred to earlier, the number of people, the way they group together, the densities, the human activities that we're doing collectively, the fuels we're using, for example, what we're manufacturing, how we're farming, and then the things we're doing as individuals. In human health, we often talk about these as lifestyle factors, our livelihoods, the way we move, for example. And then here in box 6, the artefacts, another ecological term for the things we make. The buildings like this one, for example, but also the houses, the apartments, the roads, the vehicles, the machines, the vegetable gardens. There are options here as well. And all of these biophysical options, of course, and the human cultural options only exist because of the rest of the biosphere. We're part of the biosphere, and when we interrogate what the biosphere is, we can look at physical elements, atmosphere, ocean, plant rocks, and living elements, plants, animals, microorganisms. And the bottom line is that the health of humans, of all other animals, all other species, and of natural systems more generally, are emergent properties from the way the system works. And in thinking about options for transformation to an eco-civilization, for example, we need to make sure that we have all of these elements in play. And I bring us back to Boyden's biosensitivity triangle, because I think it's very helpful here too. So we need to understand this wide range of human activities in the context of a human civilization. The implications for our health of well-being and for the health of natural systems, and understand that these are dynamic processes. Just a few final remarks about urbanisation specifically. Human ecology also reminds us that we need to keep in our frame the set of universal health needs that we all share as members of the human species. Often in public health we tend to focus principally on the biophysical health needs, air, water, diet, things I've been talking about earlier in this talk, but we sometimes overlook the psychosocial needs that we all share, and we need to make sure that we bring these into play when we're imagining different urban futures. An emotional support network, the experience of conviviality in the way we live in cities, opportunities for cooperation, a natural level of sensory stimulation, an interesting environment, the list goes on there. And this is an infographic that we now use at the University of Sydney to explain what we mean by planetary health. So, as I said, it's a cultural transformation. It's about safeguarding the health and well-being of current and future generations through good stewardship of Earth's natural systems, and by rethinking the way we feed, move, house, power, and care for the world. So this is the Boyden biosensitivity triangle. You can see here the things we do, the implications for human health and for the health of the planet. And here in this banner, how we manage ourselves to leave no one behind in that language of the UN system. But essentially this is the governance piece, what we value, our education, regulations that we might put in place, and the economic system. And just to give it a bit more specificity, we've identified 5 big pathways: how we feed the world, move the world, house the world, power the world, and care for the world. And we could put these all up here, like we could say how we're feeding the world, how we're feeding China, for example. How do we do that in a way that optimises the health of people and natural systems? And we could do that for moving, housing, powering, and caring for the world. And then again, of course, always reminding ourselves that the bottom line is that our future depends on the health of the natural world. And certainly in my profession, we've been overlooking that in recent decades, and we need to reclaim that understanding. But perhaps I should stop there, Luigi, and open it up for some conversation. I've got some more slides about cities, but I'm not sure that we need to get there, because I think I've already used up about an hour of time. Thanks.